The next day, the daughter of the Santander's family was called to the master. She had not been there for a long time, so she decided to refresh her memory and go to the gentleman herself for a short walk to him. She was currently on vacation from the academy, so now she needed to pay a welcome visit to nearby families. But for her, this was not the main thing, because she actually wanted to personally meet the famous warrior Ardina. But she understood that if she was truly that strong, then she would need to respect her slaves as well. She imagined them as courageous and elegant. At this moment, a human male was standing right in front of her, watching the elf slave. But he was caught doing it and forced to go to work. She thought for a second that this human slave could be special, but thought that he was too low level for that. She did not think about it for long, because she was wasting her time and decided to immediately go to the master's room. She went there and noticed that the gentleman began to cry almost immediately as soon as she entered, so she thought that she had done something wrong. At the same time, a fierce fight took place on the training field between the coach and the daughter of the head, who was becoming stronger. Despite the fact that she was the daughter of the head of this place, she was quite clumsy. So right in the middle of a training battle, she fell down and was injured. She behaved just like a child, but the trainer was not going to play with her and follow her lead, so he refused to help her. But he wasn't so angry as to force her to train when she was very tired, so he allowed her to rest for a while. She lay down and began to relax during a break from training, but then they decided to talk because she had heard rumors that he was scolded by the maids. There were rumors that he was trying to play with the maid, and they decided to do it in exchange for help and allowed him to warm up. This was a very shameful thing for him because these rumors spread very quickly, although the girl's sister did not know about it yet. But in fact, this girl was jealous because he could warm up with her during training, and not with someone else, so she offered him this, which embarrassed him very much. The girl, who was the daughter of the head of the Santander's family, was already about to return to her carriage after talking with the head. Then she realized that the mood in this family had really changed. The father at that moment was actually glad that his daughter's friend came to visit her, because his daughter dreamed about this for a very long time. The daughter of the head of Santander's was very surprised when she heard from her friend's father that she was working out with her master in the yard, but she understood that she was a bad student, so she needed additional training. She understood that she was a very problematic child in the family. His daughter, although she was a high elf, did not have the ability to breathe mana, so she was surprised when she found out that there was someone who could help her. But suddenly returning along the usual road, she noticed the two of them when the master allowed her to rest and helped her relax during the break. She was very embarrassed when she noticed what they were doing, but she decided to hide and watch them further. Due to the fact that Ritisha didn't really know what was going on there, by the way, that's her name. She came up with all sorts of stupid things. She watched it with a face of complete shock and couldn't believe it was real because it was happening in broad daylight. Suddenly, she noticed that the person she was with was a human slave, so she could not allow this to continue and interrupted them. Yushin at that moment realized that it was her visit that Aroni was talking about, but she misunderstood everything, so she began to scold the two of them. Suddenly, Ratasia noticed that Yushin was lost in his thoughts and was looking at her very strangely. It was because of his strange thoughts. She couldn't believe that her slave could be her trainer, but then Aron said that he actually defeated her older sister. Then Retadius's eyes filled with interest, because she imagined the knight who defeated the strongest a little differently. Yushin looked stupid. She couldn't believe that such an idiot could be so strong, but suddenly he offered her a helping hand so she could climb up to them. His manners weren't that bad, but suddenly he started making fun of her and talking about her beauty. She was embarrassed, but still accepted the compliment. Aron, who stood on the sidelines, could not say a word, despite the fact that she was very jealous of Yushin at that moment. She wanted to thank him for this, but he interrupted her and began to thank her in return, because his people from the team were with her and she treated them well. The master began to ask her about his guys because he had not seen them for a very long time and was worried that something might happen to them. Suddenly, the master began to cry, and Aron began to worry about him because he was her favorite trainer who constantly supported her. Ritazia didn't understand why he started crying and why suddenly the atmosphere changed because everything was fine with his people. Then she interrupted his tears and decided to say that they did not mock the people who live with them. Aroni even actually envied them because they lived too well. These words confused him, because he did not expect this. Isania, Comrade Yushina, was returning to his room at that moment, but he was quite ashamed, because after such a time he was still confused in the huge castle. He also couldn't believe that they were really keeping him, because he had a personal room, delicious food from the chefs, and beautiful elves. Then he suddenly met one of them, who constantly helped him find his room, and she immediately realized that he was lost again. Isania didn't know how to thank her for her help, so he decided to ask directly, because he understood that she wanted something. Then she decided to hint to him that she wanted to play with him because she had some free time. Isanya immediately understood this, so he invited her to go to his room so that they could play the console together. She was very happy after his proposal. Isanya actually liked it very much because she answered him with enthusiasm. They went to his room and then she decided to warm up before they started the game, and he decided to help her with this. She of course didn't mind and asked him about it because she really liked it, and so they eventually moved on to a regular game. Mr. Isanya was a well-mannered guy and tried not to touch what he shouldn't touch, but now he should have been more rude. After they warmed up, they moved on to the main game again. At this moment, Isana was as relaxed as possible because she was very sweet. They played with each other very nicely, but the elf's words embarrassed him very much because they were very gentle. He had no choice but to enjoy it and he didn't want to give it up, but he was close to victory, so he didn't give in to it. They played with the console, and after that she began to get ready because she still had things to do in the castle, but she wanted to repeat it so she would return there at night. Ritazia seemed to be telling the truth, but after a couple of days, Yushin decided to go to their castle because she invited him there. He decided to ask her about it when she came to them, but now the three of them were riding in a two-seater carriage, and it was because Aron had joined them. She herself decided to join them, despite the fact that he was traveling with her older sister, who decided to greet their family. The older sister and Yushin clearly understood at that moment that she was acting like a child, but Yushin actually liked to sit between them, although he was scared. Ardina, despite the fact that she bought this master for herself, gave him to her sister so that he could teach her, and this made her very happy. Arena at that moment began to play with Yushin, and this embarrassed Arena very much, although she said that she didn't care. She began to get even more embarrassed when Yushin decided to tease his older sister along with Arena and sat down next to her. She looked back at them from time to time. To be honest, Yushin thought she was very cute and beautiful, but he liked teasing her even more, so he continued. Suddenly, Aron told him that he was bought for 50 million, which was very expensive. This money was put aside for her wedding as a dowry, but she decided to spend it on it and was very happy about it. They continued to communicate in the carriage, pretending that she was not there, and decided to talk about the fact that they wanted to get married. At that moment, Ardina could not restrain herself and tried to stop them, even though a couple of minutes ago she told them that she didn't care. But at that moment, she could not think of anything better than that she had to try it first, so that she could get married in peace. Eugene had already gotten into character, so he suggested that she try holding hands so she could try it out, because that's how they were driving. Arden acted like a puppy, and it was very cute, because she was like a little girl. Despite the fact that she was very embarrassed, she gave him her hand. Eugene himself was pleased with what was happening, because now there were two cute sisters next to him. He began to imagine that they were actually his and how he could play with them. His imagination was unlimited. Despite the fact that these were just thoughts, he was disappointed because he believed that he was dreaming of the impossible. He could not find even one girl in his entire life, and suddenly his thoughts were interrupted because thinking about this, he did not notice how they arrived at the castle. Having arrived there, Eugene noticed that there was a rather unusual atmosphere, and the castle had an extremely strange shape. They arrived at the entrance and were immediately greeted by maids who were ordered to greet the guests. They were hospitable. Aron and Arden needed to greet the head of their family, so Eugene remained alone in this castle. The palace was huge, so they were escorted. In this palace, the maids were beast people, whom Eugene saw for the first time and could not resist looking at her, even though Aron asked him. They walked along the usual path, but Eugene didn't understand why the maid was pressing so hard and didn't let him walk normally. But he didn't care because he came there to meet his people and decided to ask her about them. She became his assistant for today, so she decided to go with Eugene to his people so that he could see them in person. They came to the place where Asania lived, and Eugene was very happy, so he already wanted to run to his room. But suddenly he heard screams from there. This made him doubt their words. The maid then grabbed him and did not let him into this room. He was worried about his fellow Isari, because terrible screams were coming from his room. She grabbed him and was not going to let go so that he wouldn't get inside, because if he saw it, he would be very shocked. At that moment, he thought that Ritachia was actually very evil, because it seemed to him that Isania was being tortured in this room at that moment. He couldn't believe that she would invite him to her palace like that, and thought that this was her way of deciding to mock him. He needed to make sure for himself that everything was fine with Isania, so he entered the room but only saw what they were playing. At that moment, he was so surprised that his eyes became balls. He could not even imagine that he would see something like this. The elf very quickly noticed that someone had entered the room, and stopped almost immediately. Although she really wanted to play with Isania, she was very embarrassed and scared at the same time, so she quickly packed her things and left there so as not to see them. Isari was very angry with Eugene because he did not consider his personal life important, and without using his manners, he burst into their room. Isari then began to tell him that they were very sad when their leader left. But Eugene was more worried about the fact that at that moment, he was calmly sitting in his room and playing with his secretary during a break. At that moment, he suddenly remembered the words of the rhetorician, who said that they were even living too well in her palace. And suddenly Eugene heard from Isari that he should see other guys. He was surprised because he thought that Isari was alone there. He came there precisely for this, but he did not at all expect that all his comrades would be there, and he would all live so well. Then he found out that his fighters were here and lived in order to fight monsters. This was their payment for life. Eugene realized that they did not suffer there, because there they could live in peace and train the rest of the soldiers to fight monsters. Eugene was not surprised by this because his fighters were ideal for such battles, but this was not the main thing for him now. He believed that they abandoned him, their captain, because they had all the comfortable living conditions and beautiful girls. But he did not. Then they began real men's conversations about who managed to play with whom in this yard. It was fun. Eugene could now be calm because he definitely didn't have to worry about them. Their life became paradise. But the guys decided to tell him about the most important thing that he didn't know. They decided to tell him about the secret. The secret was the reason why they were so good at communicating with people and playing with them. Even though they were helpful and trained them, young Devu was too smart and there was no point in trusting them. Therefore, they all realized that as soon as they returned to their lands, they would be put on trial because they were ordinary people. Isania at that moment became very angry because he did not want their captain to know about this and live in peace. Nothing could be done about it because for the kingdom they had now become criminals. These are the laws of people. They were not from noble families, so they understood that no one would help them, but the elves were not going to let them go. Because of the captain's stories about who he lived with in his kingdom, they all realized that he was happy. Maybe they had a better life there. Some time passed, so their time in this palace ended, and he had to return with his sisters to his home. Upon returning home, they decided to immediately return to their training to keep up with the plan. But they were tired, so they quickly went on a break. Eugene, during a break, decided to make her a special drink that would help her quickly progress in her training. Aroni didn't know if this drink would work on elves, but she didn't have to worry, because they were quite similar. Aron was in a good mood, so she suddenly decided to ask Eugene if he was glad to know such a beautiful elf like her. But Eugene didn't even answer this question, because he thought that she decided to make fun of him. Then Aron was very upset, because she just wanted to hear a compliment from him that she was beautiful. After thinking about it, she didn't even notice that she said it out loud, so Eugene immediately told her that she was really very beautiful. He began to often mention her name during these compliments, and this embarrassed her very much. But suddenly he started talking about his daughter-in-law. This was the first time Aron learned that the master had a woman, and these words shocked her that she stopped listening to him altogether. After they trained, Aron went about her business, but all the way she could not get rid of the thought of the master's wife. She understood perfectly well that she was just an enemy for him, whom he was forced to train, but she was interested in the question of who he would choose between them. She was in love with the master but tried to hide it, and now she was worried about the question. Would she have a chance of being chosen by the master? Suddenly, Ardina called her younger sister to break the news that an important person was coming to them for negotiations. This would again be an offer to ransom Eugene from them, but their father was already tired of such offers, so she didn't know how it would end. Aron was very upset when she heard this news from her sister, because she did not want to let him go. He won't come back if he leaves. She was so desperate that she asked her sister to stop it. She trained hard with him and her skills improved greatly. But Ardina interrupted her younger sister and said that she would be powerless in this because the whole choice would remain with Eugene. Aron got angry because of this, because she didn't understand the meaning of why her sister told her about this, because only the master's opinion decided. Ardina replied that she would still have to keep it a secret and told it because she thought it was right for her to know it. Ardina felt very guilty about what was happening because she felt like she had betrayed her own sister. But then Aron behaved like an adult and decided to come to terms with it because they couldn't do anything about it. They could only hope for Eugene's decision. Although Aron pretended that everything was fine and she had resigned herself, Ardina immediately realized that her sister was upset. She couldn't let him go because she hadn't yet fulfilled all her dreams with him. He promised to hug her when she succeeded. But she had some plan to stop him if her sister and father couldn't do it, so she already decided that she would use him. It was already late, so Eugene was sitting in his room and minding his own business, but suddenly Aron knocked on his door. He didn't know the reason why she came to him at such a late hour, but he put his book aside and decided to let her in. When she came to him, he was very surprised. After all, she used her secret plan. She came to talk to him about the delegation from Valois. Eugene at that moment was confused but did not show it. He had already seen elves in similar clothes before, but he did not feel anything towards them. But when Aron came to him in such things, he began to feel very strange and could not focus at all. She suddenly asked him about his daughter-in-law, but then he only thought about remembering her entire appearance and remembering alone. He just wanted to remember this later to play with, but Aroni suddenly took a decisive step inviting him to play with her, because she herself wanted it. Hearing this from her, he was very surprised. After all, just a couple of minutes ago, she asked him about his daughter-in-law, who apparently was waiting for him. But his thoughts went away when Aron stood up decisively and did it. She was going to keep him, so she confessed her love to him. She was going to make him forget about his daughter-in-law and play with him so that he could feel it all himself. Aron was very close to Eugene and was very nervous because it was the first time she wanted to play with someone. He began to worry because of this, he began to feel Aron's heavy breathing on him. Eugene didn't understand what happened to her because she usually acted like a child, but now she acted completely different. In an instant, she turned into a real woman, and Eugene knew that he couldn't resist it. He decided to start warming up with her before throwing the first ball into the goal, but noticed that she could not contain her happiness from this. Aron wanted to take this opportunity to fulfill the promise they made to each other on the first day. The master did not forget about it and wanted to warm up with her a little differently, but she said that it was a special day for them, so they could do it. He couldn't refuse the opportunity, so they continued to play. They braided the cheese in their mouth. It was their first time doing this, and for them, this was enough to warm up completely before the main game. He was very worried about everything that was happening because he had never done something like this before and didn't know how he would play. They were both ready to play, but Eugene decided that it was still better to warm up the goal so that it would receive the ball well, and then Aron would become embarrassed. Aron behaved very nicely at that moment and admitted to Eugene that she was warming up the gates before all this thinking about him. Eugene told her that she was very cute, and she liked it so much that they braided the hair again. But this time it felt much different, so the master began to act sharply because he understood that the gate was completely ready. So in small steps they reached the main course, namely the beginning of the first round in their ball game. When Aron saw her master's ball, she was very surprised because she would never have thought that he was hiding such a big ball from her. Although it was a joke, after that they decided to inflate this ball a little, so Aron began to use it differently. Eugene could no longer take his eyes off this and watched only this, because then she turned into a hungry girl. Aron's face changed the moment she could fully use this ball and enjoy this moment. She was just like a hungry succubus. But suddenly Aron stopped because she was in a little pain because of his huge sword. She couldn't fully process it. He couldn't believe that he would ever see Aron in this position, but he really liked it and decided to take advantage of it. He could not describe in words what was happening. He only enjoyed the taste of the gate that he was tasting right now. This was spectacular, and this embarrassed Aron even more because he had never said this to her. And now he began to pay old compliments to her. He had never given her compliments, but now he couldn't tell her anything other than them because he was enjoying this game. The gate and rim were excellent in appearance. Suddenly Eugene told Arona that she was much more beautiful than his bride, and these words simply drove her crazy. She wanted to hear it again, so she decided to ask the master if it was true. But then he began to play much more aggressively because she hesitated in his words. Then Eugene decided that she should be punished, and her punishment would be very severe. She raised her hands and was not allowed to lower them while Eugene was playing in goal. It was very cruel, so even despite her punishment, she could not restrain her hands and still let them go. Then their game, which the master called training, would continue and move on to the most important stage, where they would begin to play with each other. She considered this training strange because this was the first time, but the master was just a man who began to conduct it. At this point, she started to get very worried because it was the first time she was playing with someone together, but it was stupid to back down when they had gone this far. The master's eyes were obsessed with her, but she could no longer do anything about it. She could just trust him and allow him to continue this game. The master was about to start, but suddenly she stopped him because she was worried that getting into the gate would be painful. But Eugene was not going to stop because of this, because once she opened the gate, there was no way to close it. It was a very exciting moment for both of them, because they finally did it, and the first shot into the goal happened. Now they were connected. Then she stopped being afraid of the game, because she realized that it was not painful, but on the contrary, it was very pleasant. Now they were playing together. She should have just trusted her master, but suddenly she wondered where he had so much experience in this. Then the master decided to admit to her that he began to learn this from books a very long time ago. But suddenly she started laughing because of it. This made Eugene angry because she was making fun of him. In fact, she was very happy because now they could learn from each other like a young couple. For them, it was their first experience. They continued to play and find out each other's weak points in this game in order to bring each other to defeat and enjoy it. She really liked spending time with him, because then he acted like a grown-up child and played with the keys in the gate. At that moment, Aron was so sweet that the master was ready to do anything for her, and she didn't even suspect it. It was just a wonderful moment when they could calmly enjoy the usual key, ball, and goal that happily accepted one ball. Aron was sweating a lot because of their game, and he noticed it. It made him want to continue playing even more at that moment. The master then thought only that he wanted to fill these gates completely, and wondered whether he should ask permission for this. But he decided that it would be unnecessary, because he wanted to fulfill his desire at all costs. Immediately after he filled the gate completely, he was filled with a feeling of joy because he saw such a happy Aron. He saw everything flowing out of the gate, and it pleased his eyes so much that they became like diamonds. It was an indescribable feeling.